Imagine a world where words held the power to shape empires, where the stroke of a stylus could command gods, decree laws, and etch history into clay for eternity. This was the realm of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, where writing wasn't just a tool, it was divine magic. And at the heart of this cosmic dance between human ingenuity and the heavens stood Nabu, the Babylonian god of scribes and wisdom, whose very name whispered the promise of knowledge. Son of Marduk, the mighty king of gods, Nabu wasn't just a deity. He was the sacred bridge between mortals and the eternal, the force that turned whispers into legends and memory into immortality. Think about it, in a land where every river, every harvest, and every star was believed to be governed by celestial wills, the act of writing was more than record-keeping. It was an act of communion with the divine. Scribes weren't just clerks, they were Nabu's chosen, their hands guided by his wisdom as they pressed cuneiform into wet clay, capturing the voices of kings, the prayers of priests, and the dreams of an entire civilization. Without Nabu's blessing, laws would fade, stories would vanish, and the very fabric of order would unravel. This is why his temples stood as grand sanctuaries of learning, where scholars and priests gathered to decode the will of the gods and safeguard the secrets of the universe. But Nabu's legacy isn't just a relic of the past, it's a mirror to our own world. How different are we, really, from those ancient scribes who sought to conquer time with words? Today, we type our thoughts into devices, etching our own stories into the digital clay of the future. The thirst to be remembered, to make our mark, is as old as humanity itself. And that's why Nabu's tale matters, because it's not just about Babylon, it's about us. So let's journey back to the dusty halls of his temples, to the whispers of clay tablets, and uncover how a god of writing became the silent architect of history. What secrets did his followers guard, and how did his wisdom echo across millennia to shape the very way we think, remember, and dream? The answers await just beyond the next word. Long before Nabu became the revered scribe of the gods, his story began in the dim shadows of Mesopotamia's earliest myths. The first whispers of his name appear in ancient Sumerian tablets, where he was known as Nisaba, a goddess of grain and writing, a duality that reflected how deeply civilization was rooted in both harvest and record-keeping. But as cultures clashed and empires rose, Nisaba's identity shifted. By the time the Akkadians carved their legends into clay, the deity had transformed into Nabu, a god who carried not just the stylus of a scribe but the weight of destiny itself. His ascent truly began in the city of Borsippa, a place that would become synonymous with his worship. Just southwest of Babylon, Borsippa was more than a city. It was a beacon of knowledge, home to the magnificent Ezida temple, where scholars decoded omens and priests preserved the sacred arts of divination. Here, Nabu was no minor figure. He was the patron of intellect, the guardian of cosmic secrets. But how did a god once tied to grain and local rites become the right hand of Marduk, king of the Babylonian pantheon? The answer lies in the politics of divinity. As Babylon grew into an empire, its gods needed to reflect its power. Marduk, once a storm god, was elevated to supreme ruler after his mythical victory over the chaos dragon Tiamat. And just as kings surround themselves with wise counselors, Marduk's court required a scribe, a divine vizier to record the laws of heaven and earth. Nabu, with his mastery of words and wisdom, was the perfect heir. Their bond wasn't just familial, it was symbolic. Marduk wielded the sword, but Nabu held the tablet. One enforced order, the other immortalized it. This wasn't just a promotion in the divine hierarchy, it was a rewriting of myth itself. Temples once dedicated to older gods were rededicated to Nabu. His festivals, like the Akitu New Year celebration, became moments where kings would kneel before his statue, reaffirming their rule by his grace. To have Nabu's favor was to have legitimacy, for what is a king without a scribe to etch his deeds into eternity? Even Hammurabi, famed for his code of laws, knew this truth. His edicts weren't just proclaimed, they were inscribed as sacred contract between ruler, god, and the ages. Yet Nabu's rise reveals a deeper truth about ancient Mesopotamia. Gods didn't just rule, they evolved. As empires expanded, so did their pantheons, absorbing and reshaping deities to fit new truths. Nabu's journey from grain goddess to celestial chancellor mirrors humanity's own leap from oral tradition to written law, from seasonal rituals to cosmic order. And in that shift, we see the birth of something timeless, the idea that words once carved into clay could outlast kingdoms, outwit death, and speak across 4,000 years to us today. To understand Nabu's power, we must trace his divine bloodline, for in ancient Mesopotamia, a god's influence was woven through their family ties as tightly as the threads of fate. Nabu's father was none other than Marduk, the thunderous king of the Babylonian pantheon, whose victory over the primordial dragon Tiamat cemented his rule over gods and mortals alike. But Marduk wasn't just a conqueror, he was the architect of cosmic order, and Nabu inherited not just his father's authority but his role as the keeper of Destiny's ledger. Yet every god has a mother, and Nabu's was Serpent, a goddess whose name whispers of creation itself. Often depicted with a crescent moon crown, Serpent was more than Marduk's consort. She was the nurturing force behind Babylon's prosperity. While Marduk wielded the scepter, Serpent ensured the fields flourished and the people thrived, making their union a balance of might and mercy. This duality flowed into Nabu, who carried both his father's command of divine law and his mother's connection to the rhythms of earthly life. But no divine lineage is complete without partnership, and Nabu's other half was Tashmetu, the goddess whose very name means the lady who listens. Where Nabu etched the words of the gods, Tashmetu embodied the act of hearing them, the sacred exchange between mortal pleas and celestial will. Together, they were more than a couple. They were the divine scribe and the answering voice, the ones who translated prayers into action. Their bond was celebrated in rituals where priests would place Tashmetu's statue beside Nabu's, symbolizing the unbroken dialogue between heaven and earth. This family tree wasn't just mythic decoration, it was a map of power. In a world where gods governed everything from floods to harvests, Nabu's ties to Marduk granted him a seat at the highest table, while his union with Tashmetu made him the bridge between the desperate and the divine. To invoke Nabu was to call upon the entire celestial court, the might of a king, the wisdom of a mother, and the mercy of a goddess who leaned in to listen. Few deities could claim such a legacy, and fewer still could wield it to shape the destiny of civilizations. Nabu's dominion over writing and wisdom wasn't just symbolic, it was the very glue that held Babylonian civilization together. In a world where kingdoms rose and fell like the Tigris and Euphrates flooded, words were the only true constant. As the divine patron of scribes, Nabu didn't simply oversee scribbling on clay. He governed the sacred act of turning thought into permanence. Every contract, every royal decree, every celestial omen recorded in cuneiform bore his invisible seal. Without him, laws would dissolve into hearsay, treaties would crumble into mistrust, and the gods themselves might forget their own promises. Consider the sheer weight of his role. When a Babylonian merchant struck a deal for a shipment of grain, the contract wasn't just notarized, it was sanctified. Scribes invoked Nabu's name before pressing their stylus into clay, transforming mundane transactions into divine covenants. Even the famous Code of Hammurabi, etched in stone for all to see, began as whispers in Nabu's ear before becoming the backbone of justice. This wasn't bureaucracy, it was theology in action. To write was to participate in the ordering of the cosmos, and Nabu stood at the center of that celestial workflow. But his influence stretched far beyond legal scrolls. Nabu was also the keeper of the Tablet of Destinies, a mythical artifact that held the fates of gods and mortals alike. Imagine a divine ledger where every birth, battle, and harvest was preordained, and Nabu, stylus in hand, had the power to amend it. When priests performed extispicy, reading the future in the entrails of sacrificed sheep, they weren't just guessing, they were consulting Nabu's archives. His connection to divination made him the ultimate strategist, the god kings turned to before launching wars or drafting laws. Yet Nabu's most enduring legacy might be his role as the great democratizer of knowledge. In a society where literacy was often reserved for elites, his temples doubled as centers of learning. The Ezida in Borsippa wasn't just a shrine, it was an ancient university where aspiring scribes mastered mathematics, astronomy, and medicine under his gaze. To study, there was to drink from the well of divine wisdom, blurring the line between education and worship. Even the legendary library of Ashurbanipal, with its thousands of tablets preserving everything from epic poetry to medical remedies, owed its existence to Nabu's cult. What's striking is how contemporary his role feels. In an age where information is currency and misinformation can topple regimes, Nabu's domain over truth and record-keeping resonates eerily today. The Babylonians understood something we're still grappling with. Civilization doesn't run on bread alone. It runs on words carefully chosen, faithfully recorded, and fiercely protected. And in their world, that sacred trust had a name, a face, and a stylus eternally poised above wet clay. The symbols of Nabu weren't just artistic choices. They were a language of power carved into the very identity of Mesopotamian culture. At the heart of his iconography stood the stylus, a simple tool that became a divine scepter in his hands. Unlike the swords of warrior gods or the lightning bolts of storm deities, Nabu's stylus was unassuming yet transformative. Made of reed or bronze, it was the instrument that turned soft clay into eternal records, a physical echo of his role as the scribe of the gods. When depicted in reliefs or cylinder seals, Nabu often holds it poised above a tablet, frozen in the act of inscribing fate itself. This wasn't just a pose, it was a visual mantra. Knowledge once written became unshakable truth. Equally sacred was the clay tablet, the canvas of Mesopotamian thought. In art, Nabu's tablets weren't blank, they bore cuneiform signs, sometimes spiraling into intricate patterns that mimicked the coils of the cosmic serpent. These weren't random marks, they mirrored the actual practice of scribes who wrote in careful lines, each wedge-shaped impression a tiny monument to order. Some depictions even show Nabu with a tablet balanced on his lap, as if the weight of divine knowledge rested there. The message was clear: to hold a tablet was to hold the building blocks of civilization. But Nabu's symbols extended beyond tools. He was frequently shown wearing a horned crown, the ultimate badge of divinity in Mesopotamian art. Unlike Marduk's towering headdress, Nabu's horns often curved gently, perhaps reflecting his role as a mediator rather than a conqueror. Ritual scenes sometimes portray him with an open hand raised, a gesture scholars interpret as both blessing and invocation, a silent command to speak, write, or listen. Even his sacred animal, the dragon-like Mus Hatchek letter 1, E2 Bus Hatchek S Hatchek U, a creature shared with Marduk, carried layered meaning. Its serpentine body evoked wisdom, while its lion's paws and eagle's claws symbolized the reach of written words able to climb the heights of heaven and dig into the depths of human affairs. Perhaps the most telling detail lies in how Nabu's imagery evolved. Early carvings show him standing stiffly, but by the height of Babylonian influence, he's dynamic, leaning forward as if in conversation, his stylus actively engaged. This shift mirrors writing's own journey from utilitarian record to a force that shaped empires. Even the colors used in glazed bricks of his temples whispered symbolism. Lapis lazuli blue for the vast heavens his wisdom touched, gold leaf for the unyielding permanence of divine decree. These symbols weren't static, they were alive in ritual. During the Akitu festival, priests would carry miniature styluses and tablets in procession, pressing them against the foreheads of initiates, a physical transfer of Nabu's power. To wear an amulet of his stylus wasn't just decoration, it was an invitation for the god to guide one's hand in judgment or poetry. And in this, we see the genius of Mesopotamian iconography. Every line, every object was a prayer made visible, a way to touch the divine through the everyday act of marking clay. Among the countless relics of Mesopotamian mythology, none held more weight literally and cosmically than the Tablet of Destinies. This wasn't just a divine notepad, it was the master blueprint of existence, the ledger where the fates of gods and mortals were inscribed. And in the hands of Nabu, the tablet became something more, a weapon of order, a shield against chaos, and the ultimate source of legitimacy. To control it was to hold the pen that wrote reality itself. The origins of the tablet trace back to the epic Enuma Elish, where it first appears as the prize in the cosmic war between Marduk and the primordial dragon Tiamat. After slaying her, Marduk seized the tablet, cementing his rule over the pantheon. But here's where Nabu enters the story. As Marduk's heir, he didn't just inherit the tablet, he became its steward, the one who interpreted its decrees and ensured their enforcement. Think of it like a celestial constitution. Marduk was the executive power, but Nabu, as scribe, was the judiciary, the keeper of precedent and protocol. What made the tablet so fearsome? Its power was twofold. First, it contained the Meh, the divine laws that governed everything from the rising of the sun to the fall of kings. Second, and more crucially, it granted its bearer the authority to alter those laws. When the storm god Enlil temporarily lost possession of the tablet in the myth of Anzu, the universe spiraled into disorder until it was recovered. This wasn't just superstition, it reflected Mesopotamian beliefs about the fragility of civilization. Without the tablet's anchor, the world risked sliding back into the watery void of Tiamat's reign. Nabu's connection to the tablet went beyond mere custody. Rituals from Babylon reveal that during the Akitu festival, priests would symbolically place the tablet in his hands, reenacting the moment where destiny was renewed for another year. Kings would then swear oaths before his statue, their legitimacy tied to his approval. Even the act of writing mirrored this symbolism. Each cuneiform stroke was a miniature echo of the tablet's power, a way for mortals to participate in the ordering of the cosmos. But the most fascinating aspect lies in how the tablet blurred the line between fate and flexibility. Unlike later concepts of unchangeable destiny, Mesopotamian cosmology allowed for edits. When a scribe amended a contract, when a priest interpreted an omen, they were channeling Nabu's authority to tweak the cosmic script. This idea resonates eerily today, in an age where algorithms and data shape our realities. We may not call it the Tablet of Destinies, but the struggle over who controls the narrative, who gets to write the rules, remains as ancient as Babylon's ziggurats. Perhaps that's why Nabu's myth endures. In a world drowning in information where truth feels increasingly malleable, his story reminds us that writing isn't just about recording, it's about responsibility. To hold the stylus is to hold power, and power, as the Babylonians knew, is never neutral. Among the towering ziggurats of Mesopotamia, the Ezida temple in Borsippa stood as a beacon of Nabu's divine authority, a place where the earthly and celestial converged through ink and clay. Rising 7 levels toward the heavens, its terraced design mirrored the cosmic ladder between mortals and gods, each tier representing a step closer to wisdom. But this wasn't just a monument, it was a living engine of ritual. Each dawn, priests bathed Nabu's statue in sacred water, dressed it in linen woven with golden cuneiform, and placed a fresh stylus in its hands, an act that transformed stone into a vessel for the god's presence. The air would thicken with the scent of cedar resin and barley beer as offerings piled high, honey for eloquence, dates for fertility of thought, and silver replicas of tablets to symbolize prayers waiting to be inscribed. The heart of Ezida's worship lay in its library, a labyrinth of clay shelves housing thousands of tablets. Here, scribes didn't merely copy texts, they performed a sacred rite, their reed styluses dipping into wet clay like Nabu's own fingers etching destiny. Before writing, they'd trace his symbol in the air, invoking his guidance to avoid errors that might anger the gods. One surviving hymn describes how a scribe's hand would tremble until Nabu's breath steadied it, a reminder that every legal contract, astronomical chart, or medical prescription was co-authored by the divine. Even the bricks of Ezida bore his mark, stamped with inscriptions declaring them the property of Nabu, who grasps the tablet of Destinies. Rituals reached their zenith during the Akitu festival, Babylon's 12-day New Year celebration where the entire cosmos was symbolically renewed. On the 5th day, Nabu's statue would journey from Borsippa to Babylon along a processional road lined with crushed lapis lazuli, the blue stone mimicking the celestial vault. Crowds surged as the god entered the Ezida temple where his father Marduk awaited. In a dramatic ceremony, the king would grasp Nabu's hand, pledging his rule remained valid only through the god's continued favor. This wasn't pageantry, it was political theology in action. When Assyrian king Sennacherib razed Babylon in 689 BC, he pointedly excluded Ezida from destruction, knowing Nabu's cult was too potent to provoke. But worship wasn't reserved for elites. Farmers left clay tokens shaped like sheep at village shrines, hoping Nabu would write healthy flocks into next year's ledger. Students pressed their homework practice tablets with multiplication tables against his statue, begging for high marks. Even the famous Babylonian map of the world, with its circular continents and encircling ocean, was likely drafted under Ezida's roof, blending geography with myth under Nabu's watch. The temple's influence stretched as far as Cyprus and Egypt, where diplomats invoked Nabu's name in treaties, proof that his authority transcended borders. What made Ezida extraordinary was its duality, a spiritual powerhouse and an intellectual hub where astronomy met incantation, math intertwined with magic. The same priests who charted Jupiter's path also crafted amulets inscribed with Nabu's verses to ward off demons. In this space, there was no conflict between science and faith, just the relentless pursuit of order, one carefully impressed wedge at a time. When Persian conquerors finally silenced Babylon's gods, Ezida's last scribes hid their tablets beneath the floors, a final act of devotion ensuring their god's words would outlive even his own silence. In the bustling cities of Mesopotamia, where every transaction, prayer, and royal decree needed to be etched into clay, scribes weren't just clerks, they were the unsung architects of civilization. And standing behind each stroke of their styluses was Nabu, the divine patron who transformed mundane record-keeping into sacred art. To be a scribe wasn't merely a profession, it was a vocation blessed by the gods. From the moment a young student first pressed wedge-shaped marks into a practice tablet, they entered Nabu's orbit, joining an elite class whose work held empires together. The training alone was a test of devotion. Apprentice scribes spent years mastering hundreds of cuneiform signs, their fingers calloused from endless repetition. But this wasn't rote memorization, it was initiation. Surviving school tablets reveal how students copied hymns to Nabu before tackling legal texts, their shaky first lines often accompanied by prayers like "Nabu, steady my hand as you steady the stars" in their courses. The god's presence was woven into every lesson. Advanced scribes learned to compose letters for kings, calculate interest rates for merchants, and even interpret the ominous cracks in sacrificed sheep livers, all under Nabu's watchful gaze. Yet their real power lay in bureaucracy. Picture the vast machinery of Mesopotamian governance, tax records, land deeds, diplomatic correspondence, all flowing through scribbled hands. A single temple archive in held over 60,000 tablets, each one a thread in the fabric of order. When a scribe stamped a contract with their seal, they weren't just notarizing, they were invoking Nabu's authority. Legal disputes often hinged on whether a document bore the correct formula. written in the presence of Nabu, who punishes the liar. To forge a tablet wasn't just fraud, it was blasphemy. But scribes did more than shuffle paperwork. They were the keepers of culture, transcribing epics like Gilgamesh and preserving medical texts that blended science with incantations. In one striking ritual, master scribes would bury their worn-out styluses in temple courtyards like fallen warriors' tools, returning to the god who lent them power. Even their mistakes carried weight. A tablet from Nineveh shows a scribe scratching out an error and adding a note. "Nabu made my stylus slip. May his forgiveness be as swift as his chastisement." What emerges is a portrait of writing as holy labor. The scribe's reed was Nabu's divine instrument, their clay his cosmic canvas. In a world without printing presses or digital backups, these men and women waged a quiet battle against oblivion, one impression at a time. And though their names rarely appear in grand inscriptions, their legacy is undeniable. Every law, poem, and ledger that survives today is a testament to their sacred partnership with the god who turned words into immortality. The clash that reshaped the cosmos, the battle between Marduk and the primordial dragon Tiamat, wasn't just a victory for one god. It was the moment Nabu stepped onto the stage of divine destiny. While the Enuma Elish crowns Marduk as the hero who slew chaos, the aftermath reveals Nabu's quiet yet pivotal role. Picture the scene. Tiamat's corpse floats in the void, her body split to form the heavens and earth, but order isn't won through brute force alone. Someone must catalog the new world, assign roles to the gods, and etch the rules into permanence. Enter Nabu, stylus in hand, ready to translate his father's triumph into a functioning universe. This wasn't mere clerical work. When Marduk created the stars to mark time, it was Nabu who recorded their positions, turning celestial bodies into a cosmic calendar. When the moon god Sin was tasked with measuring months, Nabu inscribed the lunar phases into the divine ledger. Even humanity's creation, fashioned from the blood of Tiamat's slain consort, bore his influence. The myth states that Nabu wrote the breath of life into clay tablets before he molded the first humans, suggesting that writing and existence were intertwined from the start. Unlike other creator gods who speak worlds into being, Nabu's power flowed through the deliberate press of wedges into clay, each mark a building block of reality. But his role went deeper than documentation. The Enuma Elish describes Nabu as the one who holds the chords of the universe, a poetic nod to his duty as cosmic surveyor. Just as Babylonian scribes used knotted ropes to measure fields, Nabu metaphorically measured the boundaries between order and chaos, ensuring the new creation didn't unravel. His stylus became a divine compass, aligning temples with constellations and kings with the will of heaven. When Marduk established Babylon as the Axis Mundi, the navel of the world, it was Nabu who sanctified its foundations with written decrees, turning bricks and mortar into a theological manifesto. What makes this fascinating is how it reframes creation itself. In many mythologies, creation is a singular, explosive act, but in Nabu's hands it becomes an ongoing process sustained by the perpetual act of writing. Every law passed, every omens interpreted, every treaty signed was a reenactment of that first divine inscription, a way to keep Tiamat's chaos at bay. Even the annual Akitu festival, where Nabu's statue journeyed to Babylon, mirrored this idea, a yearly update to the cosmic operating system, with Nabu as its celestial programmer. The genius of this mythology lies in its acknowledgement that order isn't self-sustaining. Without Nabu's ceaseless recoding, the universe risked sliding back into the formless deep. His presence in the Enuma Elish, often overshadowed by Marduk's thunder, reminds us that creation isn't just about beginnings. It's about the quiet, relentless work of preservation, one carefully inscribed word at a time. And in that truth, we see the essence of Mesopotamian thought. Civilization isn't a given. It's a story we keep writing, lest the dragons return. in the hushed chambers of Nabu's temples, where the scent of burnt cedar mixed with the tang of fresh blood, a different kind of writing took place, one not etched in clay but revealed in the pulsing entrails of sacrificed sheep. This was extispicy, the ancient art of divination, where priests became living styluses, translating the secrets of the gods from the folds of a liver or the coil of an intestine. And presiding over it all was Nabu, not just as scribe but as the divine intermediary who made the incomprehensible legible. To the Babylonians, the future wasn't just predicted, it was read, with Nabu's wisdom guiding every interpretation. The ritual began at dawn when a flawless lamb, its wool unblemished, its horns intact, was led to the altar. As the priest slit its belly, he wasn't merely slaughtering an animal, he was opening a celestial text. The liver, believed to be the seat of life, became a clay tablet of the gods, its lobes, veins, and ridges forming a cuneiform only the initiated could decipher. Priests trained for decades, memorizing thousands of omens catalogued in texts like the famous Shama Izbu, where a cleft gallbladder might foretell a king's downfall, while a misshapen spleen warned of invading armies. But here's the twist, these signs weren't fixed. Just as Nabu could amend the tablet of Destinies, a skilled diviner might update a grim omen through counter-rituals, burning specific herbs, reciting Nabu's hymns, or even altering the angle of the sacrificial knife mid-cut. Divination wasn't fate, it was a negotiation, with Nabu as the mediator between mortal pleas and divine will. Beyond entrails, Nabu's oracular influence extended to celestial signs. Babylonian astronomers, priests in another guise, tracked planetary movements as if reading a cosmic ledger, correlating Jupiter's retrograde with rebellions or Venus's brightness with harvests. A tablet from Nineveh records how a scribe observed Mars writing angry words in the sky before a neighboring kingdom attacked. These weren't metaphors. To them, the stars were literal inscriptions by Nabu's hand, his stylus scratching light into the night. Even dreams fell under his domain. A merchant troubled by visions might submit a clay tablet describing them to Ezida's priests, who'd file it alongside decades of similar reports, searching for patterns Nabu had encoded in humanity's collective subconscious. What set Nabu's divination apart was its bureaucratic precision. Omens were cross-referenced, archived, and even notarized. One surviving liver model bears a scribe's note, verified by Nabu Zeraidina, chief haruspex, in the presence of Nabu's statue. This was divination as a science, blending observation with theology. When Assyrian King Esarhaddon hesitated before invading Egypt, he didn't rely on a single omen. He demanded 30 consecutive favorable liver readings, each one meticulously recorded like a celestial permission slip stamped by Nabu himself. Yet for all its formalism, Nabu's oracle retained an intimacy. Farmers could bring a sick goat's liver to local shrines, where part-time priests, often scribes by day, would interpret it for a handful of grain. A letter from a desperate mother to Nabu's statue pleads, "Tell me if my son lives or dies," accompanied by a tiny clay model of a healthy liver, as if bribing the god with the answer she longed to see. This duality, grand state, ritual and personal solace, reveals Nabu's truest power. He didn't just reveal fate, he made the universe legible, from the trembling hands of a peasant to the throne rooms of kings. In a world where chaos lurked beyond every ziggurat, that was the ultimate comfort, the belief that nothing, not even the future, was truly unwritten. From the banks of the Euphrates to the Nile Delta, the figure of the divine scribe transcended borders, revealing how deeply Mesopotamia's intellectual legacy permeated neighboring cultures. Nabu's closest counterpart was Egypt's Thoth, the ibis-headed god whose very feathers were said to dip into the ink of creation. Both deities governed writing and wisdom, but where Nabu's power flowed through the administrative might of cuneiform tablets, Thoth's magic manifested in hieroglyphs, symbols believed to hold life itself. The parallels run deeper. Just as Nabu recorded Destinies on his celestial tablet, Thoth stood beside Osiris in the Hall of Judgment, inscribing the outcomes of mortal lives on his palm leaf scroll. Their temples too mirrored one another as Ezida's tablet-lined halls, finding an echo in Thoth's House of Life at Hermopolis, where priests preserved medical texts beneath statues of baboons, his sacred animal. Yet fascinating divergences emerge in their roles. While Nabu served as Marduk's vizier within a rigid celestial hierarchy, Thoth often played mediator between warring gods like Horus and Set, his neutrality making him the cosmic referee. This distinction reflects their culture's differing values. Babylonian society prized structured order, while Egyptian mythology embraced balance through tension. Even their tools differed. Nabu's wedge-shaped stylus contrasted with Thoth's reed pen, one designed for angular impressions in clay, the other for flowing ink on papyrus. Trade routes between the two civilizations likely facilitated the exchange of these divine archetypes, with evidence suggesting Thoth absorbed some of Nabu's administrative traits during Egypt's New Kingdom period, when diplomatic correspondence between the empires peaked. The Hellenistic era saw this cross-pollination intensify through the figure of Hermes Trismegistus, a Greco-Egyptian fusion of Thoth and the Greek messenger god Hermes. Here, Nabu's legacy took a new form: Hermes' caduceus staff, subtly echoing the Babylonian god stylus, both symbols of communication between realms. Greek historians like Herodotus explicitly linked Thoth to Hermes, creating a theological bridge that spanned three cultures. When Alexander the Great conquered Babylon in 331 BC, his chroniclers noted how local priests compared Nabu to Hermes, suggesting the Macedonian king's arrival fulfilled Nabu's prophecies. This wasn't mere coincidence, it was strategic syncretism, allowing conquerors and conquered to find common ground in shared divine archetypes. Even beyond the Mediterranean, echoes of Nabu's archetype appear. The Zoroastrian Amesha Spenta Vo, Humana, the divine entity of good thought, bears striking similarities in his role as celestial record keeper. Some scholars argue these connections weren't accidental but sprung from prolonged contact during the Achaemenid Empire's rule over Babylon. The pattern repeats in Hindu traditions, where the elephant-headed Ganesha breaks his tusk to transcribe the Mahabharata, becoming another variation on the theme of divine scribes sacrificing part of themselves to preserve knowledge. What makes Nabu's influence extraordinary is how it adapted without diluting. Unlike gods of war or fertility, whose traits shifted dramatically across cultures, the scribe deity's core remained recognizable, a testament to writing's universal power. Whether as Thoth weighing hearts in Duat or Hermes delivering messages on winged sandals, these figures all carried Nabu's essential truth: that civilization survives not by the sword but by the word. Their shared legacy proves that long before globalization, ideas traveled on clay tablets and papyrus rolls, weaving a silent network of thought that connected empires across rivers, deserts, and centuries. When a Babylonian king ascended the throne, his first act wasn't raising an army or collecting taxes, it was reaching for a stylus. Royal inscriptions from this era reveal a fascinating pattern. Nearly every declaration of power, every victory boast, every legal reform begins not with the king's own name but with Nabu's. Take the famous Cylinder of Cyrus, where the Persian conqueror justifies his rule over Babylon by claiming Nabu took his hand in welcome, a subtle but powerful signal that even foreign rulers needed the scribe god's endorsement to seem legitimate. This wasn't empty flattery, it was political theology in action. The strategy was deliberate. Kings understood that raw force could seize power, but only Nabu's blessing could cement it in the collective memory. Hammurabi's code opens not with threats or demands, but with the image of Nabu presenting the king with a stylus and tablet, framing the laws as divinely dictated rather than human decreed. Another inscription from Nebuchadnezzar II describes how the king waited in Ezida until Nabu's lips moved, suggesting the god personally whispered policy into his ear. These weren't just flowery metaphors, they were carefully crafted narratives designed to show the monarch as Nabu's earthly counterpart, a scribe king whose edicts carried celestial weight. What's striking is how kings weaponized Nabu's imagery in times of crisis. When Sargon of Akkad faced rebellion, his scribes produced tablets depicting Nabu writing the names of traitors in a ledger of destruction. Similarly, Ashurbanipal's library inscriptions show the Assyrian king holding a stylus beside Nabu's statue, visually equating royal and divine authority during his brutal suppression of Babylonian revolts. Even the physical placement of these texts mattered. Royal decrees were often embedded in temple foundations beneath Nabu's feet, literally building the state on his approval. But this relationship wasn't one-sided. Kings didn't just borrow Nabu's prestige, they actively shaped his mythology to serve their agendas. The controversial king Nabonidus, who sidelined Marduk to elevate the moon god Sin, suddenly emphasized Nabu's role as interpreter of Sin's will, creating a theological bridge to justify his heresy. Later, when the Seleucids ruled Babylon, Greek-style inscriptions began portraying Nabu with Apollo's lyre, blending cultures to ease the transition of power. The genius of this system lay in its flexibility. Whether native dynasties or foreign conquerors, all could claim Nabu's favor by participating in his rituals. During the Akitu festival, kings would publicly take Nabu's hand in a ceremony reenacting Marduk's mythical transfer of authority, a ritual so potent that even Alexander the Great submitted to it. Surviving tablets record how the Macedonian conqueror carefully rehearsed the cuneiform phrases needed to speak as Nabu's mouthpiece, proving that divine scribes outlasted even the mightiest emperors. These inscriptions reveal a profound truth about Mesopotamian power. Legitimacy wasn't written in blood but in clay. A king without Nabu's endorsement was like an unsigned tablet, visibly incomplete, open to challenge. And so they kept writing, generation after generation, their voices merging with the gods in a timeless dialogue between throne and temple, sword and stylus, mortal ambition and immortal word. The tides of divinity shift like desert sands, and even gods can fade when empires crumble. Nabu's twilight began not with a sudden fall, but with the slow erosion of the world that birthed him. As Alexander the Great's armies marched into Babylon in 331 BC, they brought more than spears and shields. They carried an entirely new cosmic order. The Hellenistic age prized Zeus and Apollo over Marduk and Nabu, yet for a time the old gods endured through careful compromise. Greek rulers, pragmatic as ever, didn't smash Babylonian temples, they rebranded them. Nabu's statues now bore inscriptions comparing him to Hermes, his stylus recast as a caduceus, his wisdom reframed as Greek philosophy, but syncretism has its limits. When Antiochus IV desecrated Jerusalem's temple in 168 BC, he didn't just attack Jewish worship, he signaled that indigenous deities were now expendable in the face of Hellenistic unity. The death knell came not from foreign scorn but from abandonment at home. As Babylon's elite adopted Greek customs, the intricate web of cuneiform bureaucracy, Nabu's lifeblood, began unraveling. Young scribes now trained in Greek script, their reed styluses gathering dust. A tablet from 150 BC poignantly records a priest's lament. The house of Nabu is bright with gold but silent as a tomb. Where are the scholars who once filled its halls? Even ritual adapted, the Akitu festival, once a 12-day spectacle renewing Nabu's covenant with kings, shrank to a hollow pantomime performed for Macedonian satraps who couldn't read the incantations. Geography mirrored this decline. While Nabu's main temple in Borsippa still drew pilgrims, smaller shrines across Mesopotamia were repurposed. One near became a Greek gymnasium, its altar stones reused as wrestling markers. The final insult came when the Parthians conquered Babylon in 141 BC. Unlike the culturally flexible Seleucids, these new rulers had no interest in propping up local gods. Nabu's statues were stripped of their lapis lazuli eyes, not in rage, but indifference, sold to traders who ground the sacred stones into pigment, yet traces stubbornly remained. In remote villages, old men still whispered Nabu's name when signing contracts long after the temples fell. Jewish communities in Babylon, though monotheistic, preserved his imagery in mystical traditions. The angel Metatron, heavenly scribe of the Talmud, bears uncanny resemblance to Nabu's iconography. Even early Christian scribes in Edessa unconsciously echoed his rituals, blessing parchment before writing as if channeling some ancestral memory, the cruelest irony. The very invention that sealed Nabu's demise, the alphabet, owed its existence to his domain. Phoenician traders, inspired by cuneiform's efficiency, created a script so simple it needed no divine patron. Writing had democratized itself, breaking free from the priesthood that once guarded it. Nabu's end wasn't violent, it was obsolescence. When the last cuneiform tablet was pressed around 75 AD, a mundane astronomical record, no one marked the passing of the god who once made those wedges sacred. His temples became quarries, his hymns forgotten until archaeologists unearthed them millennia later. Yet in libraries worldwide where silent scholars still bend over texts, the ghost of Nabu lingers, not in prayers but in the act itself, the human yearning to pin fleeting thought to eternity, one careful mark at a time. Among the countless clay tablets unearthed from Mesopotamia's ruins, Nabu's name appears with a frequency that borders on reverence, not just in grand royal decrees, but in the quiet, everyday texts that reveal how deeply his influence seeped into the fabric of thought. Take the hymn known as Nabu's Exaltation, where a scribe describes the god's voice as a flood of honey, dripping wisdom into the ears of scholars. This wasn't poetic flourish, it was theology in motion. The same tablets that record crop yields or property disputes suddenly burst into lyrical praise when Nabu enters the scene, his titles stacking like layers of a ziggurat: holder of the stylus, opener of the ear, he who knows the secret names of things. Scholarly texts offer even richer glimpses. In the commentary on liver omens, a meticulous guide to divination, every interpretation begins with the phrase, "as Nabu has written," treating the god's authority as the ultimate footnote. Medical tablets from Ashurbanipal's library prescribe remedies alongside incantations invoking Nabu's unerring stylus to correct bodily imbalances, as if illness were a scribble error waiting to be erased. Even mathematical exercises reveal his touch. One school tablet from Nippur shows a student calculating the dimensions of a temple courtyard, then scribbling Nabu's name in the margin like a divine rubber stamp approving the work. But perhaps the most poignant evidence lies in the personal prayers. A letter from a grieving father to Nabu's statue pleads, "You who record the years of men, add more to my son's tablet." Another, from a struggling scribe, confesses, "My hand trembles like a drunkard's, steady it as you steady the stars." These weren't formal rituals, they were raw, intimate conversations with a god who doubled as a cosmic notary, auditing human lives with the same precision he applied to celestial ledgers. The sheer volume of Nabu's textual presence tells its own story. Out of 30,000 tablets excavated at Sippar, over 2,000 mention him directly, more than any deity except Marduk and Ishtar. Even in administrative records, his name lingers like ink stains. Temple inventories note styluses reserved for Nabu's hand, and ration lists detail the honey and fine oil allotted to those who eat Nabu's bread, the scribble elite. What emerges is a portrait of a god who refused to be confined to myth. In cuneiform literature, Nabu isn't just a character, he's a collaborator, his fingerprints on everything from epic poetry to grain receipts. When the Epic of Gilgamesh describes the hero carving his tale into stone, it's Nabu's invisible guidance that turns chisel marks into immortality. And in that truth, we see the genius of Mesopotamian thought. Writing wasn't just communication. It was communion. Every wedge pressed into clay was a silent prayer to the god who made memory endure. Among the countless clay tablets preserving Babylonian theology, one stands apart like a celestial census, the unequal Anum god list, a sprawling register of divine hierarchy that reads like a who's who of the Mesopotamian pantheon. Here, Nabu's entry isn't just a name among many, it's a masterclass in theological clout. Positioned as the seventh deity in the list, a number sacred to Mesopotamian cosmology, Nabu follows the big three of Anu, Enlil, and E, yet precedes even legendary figures like Ishtar and Shamash. This placement is no accident. It signals his role as both scribe and kingmaker, a deity whose pen holds more sway than the swords of war gods. The unequal Anum doesn't merely list gods, it maps power. Each entry includes epithets that function like divine job titles, and Nabu's are telling. Lord of the Stylus, holder of the Tablet of Destinies, he who ordains kings. These aren't honorary badges, they're administrative portfolios. Compare this to how the list describes Ninurta, the warrior god, as a subduer of rebels. While Ninurta enforces order, Nabu defines it through written decrees. Even more revealing is his proximity to Marduk. Though listed separately, Nabu's entry includes the phrase, son who avenges his father, a nod to their symbiotic rule. Marduk governs, but Nabu legitimizes. What's truly groundbreaking is how the unequal Anum reimagines divine relationships. Earlier Sumerian god lists like the Widener list ranked deities by age and primal force, placing agricultural gods like Enlil at the top. But in Babylon's revised hierarchy, Nabu, a god of human-centric art, sits above nature deities like Adad, the storm god. This mirrors Babylon's urban revolution. Civilization now outranked the elements. A temple inventory from Sippar confirms this shift, showing Nabu's shrine receiving more silver offerings than Adad's, despite the latter's control over rain and crops. Yet the list holds subtler clues too. Nabu shares his section with lesser-known scribbled deities like Ninima, but while they're labeled servants of Nabu, he's termed advisor to Anu. This distinction matters. Anu was the sky god and cosmic CEO, making Nabu something akin to heaven's chief council. Legal tablets from Nippur reveal that when oaths were sworn by Anu, they were often written in Nabu's hand, implying he drafted celestial contracts. The unequal Anum also exposes Nabu's fluid identity. In one variant, he's called Nabu of Borsippa, anchoring him to his cult center, but another fragment dubs him Nabu of Babylon, highlighting his political ascent. This duality reflects Babylon's imperial strategy. Local gods were absorbed but not erased, their power channeled toward the capital. Even Nabu's mother fluctuates between Sarpanit and the Sumerian grain goddess Nisaba across different versions, a theological remix showing how Babylon reshaped older myths to fit new narratives. Perhaps most telling is who isn't in Nabu's orbit. The chaotic underworld goddess Ereshkigal appears far down the list, separated from Nabu by 30 entries, a deliberate cosmic zoning to keep chaos at bay. Meanwhile, Nabu's fellow wisdom gods like E cluster near him like a divine think tank. The message is clear: writing isn't just a skill, it's the scaffolding of reality, and Nabu holds the blueprint. This god list wasn't just reference material, it was ritual scripture. During the Akitu festival, priests would recite sections aloud, and Nabu's titles were chanted as incantations to renew the king's mandate. When Assyrian usurpers like Sargon II seized Babylon, they quickly commissioned new copies of the unequal Anum, inserting their own names into Nabu's blessings. Even foreign rulers grasped the list's power. A Hellenistic-era tablet clumsily equates Nabu with Hermes in Greek, but keeps his original titles, proving some forces transcend translation. The unequal Anum ultimately reveals Babylon's genius for bureaucracy turned theology. In a pantheon where gods once represented natural forces, Nabu's prominence signals a world where human systems, law, scholarship, governance became as vital as sun and storm. His place in this divine directory isn't just a ranking, it's a revolution written in wedges, proof that the pen had indeed become mightier than the plough. In the shadowed halls of the Mesopotamian underworld, where the dead drank dust and forgot their names, Nabu's stylus still scratched quiet but unrelenting. While most knew him as the celestial scribe of the living world, a cluster of fragmented tablets reveals his darker portfolio, chronicler of the departed. The myth Nergal and Ereshkigal hints at this role, describing how Nabu would descend annually to the realm of the dead, not as a prisoner like Ishtar, but as an auditor. His task to review the tablet of life and death, a ledger where every mortal's allotted years were tallied in one column and their actual fate in another. The discrepancies, those who died too soon or lingered too long, required his divine correction, a cosmic balancing act between the underworld's hunger and the heavens' justice. This wasn't mere bookkeeping. In the Descent of Nabu, a poorly preserved text from Sippar, the god confronts Ereshkigal, queen of the dead, over a soul wrongly consumed by plague. Their negotiation plays out like a courtroom drama. Nabu cites earlier precedents from his tablets, while Ereshkigal counters with the underworld's immutable laws. The resolution, fragmentary as it is, suggests Nabu could amend death itself, transferring years from one soul to another like a scribe editing a flawed contract. Imagine the implications. A child stolen by fever might be granted extra decades borrowed from a wicked elder's surplus, all notarized in cuneiform. Yet Nabu's underworld role extended beyond arbitration. Funeral hymns from Babylon describe him standing at the Gate of Tears, where newly arrived souls would whisper their names to him. Unlike Osiris's judgment or Hades' indifference, Nabu's duty was preservation, ensuring the dead weren't erased from history even as their bodies decayed. Families would deposit clay name tags in his temples, begging him to write their ancestors into the dustless archive, a celestial library where no lineage faded. The most haunting evidence comes from exorcism rituals. When a ghost plagued the living, priests didn't summon a warrior god, they invoked Nabu. Tablet KR 267 details how he'd interview the restless dead, transcribe their grievances, then file the complaint in the underworld's bureaucracy. One spell commands, Nabu, take your black stylus and write the ghost's hunger on dark clay, that Ereshkigal may feed it. Here, writing wasn't metaphor, it was ritual technology, a way to hack the afterlife's paperwork. What makes these myths startling is their inversion of Nabu's sunny reputation. The god who penned laws for kings also notarized the quiet despair of the forgotten. His stylus moved equally through the ink of glory and the ash of oblivion, a reminder that in Mesopotamia, even death couldn't break the habit of record-keeping. The underworld, it seems, was just another branch office in Nabu's vast administrative empire. Among the countless clay tablets dedicated to Nabu's wisdom, some reveal a lesser-known facet of his divinity, his mastery over the fragile boundary between life and death. While scribes invoked him for flawless contracts and kings sought his blessing for legitimacy, the sick and suffering called upon Nabu as a healer, a divine physician whose stylus could scribe not just laws but remedies. A medical text from Ashurbanipal's library prescribes a poultice for fever, instructing the practitioner to write Nabu's name in honey on the patient's brow before applying the mixture. This wasn't mere superstition. It reflected a profound belief that illness, like broken treaties or unfinished epics, was a flaw in life's ledger, one only the celestial scribe could correct. The connection between writing and healing ran deep in Mesopotamian thought. Just as a misplaced wedge in cuneiform could alter a contract's meaning, a misaligned bodily text, veins, pulses, even the liver's contours could spell disaster. Surviving medical tablets often begin with phrases like "Nabu knows the correct form," framing diagnoses as acts of decipherment. One remarkable incantation against childbed fever describes the goddess Lamashtu, a demoness who stalked newborns, as a tablet Nabu did not seal, implying that unapproved text or unapproved lives were vulnerable to chaos. To counter her, mothers would wear amulets shaped like Nabu's stylus, believing its form could edit the body's invisible script back to health. But Nabu's healing role wasn't limited to metaphor. The god's temples doubled as early medical schools, where priest-physicians trained to interpret symptoms as if reading omens. A student's tablet from Borsippa lists over 50 herbal remedies alongside Nabu's epithet, opener of the veins, suggesting anatomical knowledge was considered part of his domain. Even surgical procedures carried his imprint. Bronze lancets excavated near Ezida bear inscriptions dedicating them to Nabu, who cuts the truth from lies, hinting at a link between surgical precision and the god's famed clarity. Perhaps the most striking evidence lies in the overlap between medical and scribble tools. Excavations at Nimrud uncovered a physician's kit containing a reed stylus alongside bone saws and probes. Modern scholars initially assumed it was misplaced until translating a nearby tablet. Let the healer's hand hold Nabu's pen as steady as his scalpel, for what is flesh but clay awaiting correction. This literal fusion of scribe and surgeon reveals a world view where healing was fundamentally an act of rewriting, adjusting the body's flawed text back to its intended form. Nabu's healing prayers also reveal a compassionate dimension rarely seen in other gods. While deities like Nergal brought plague or Ishtar demanded suffering as tribute, Nabu's incantations emphasize restoration without conditions. A tablet from Yorok records a plea from a paralyzed man. Nabu, if my limbs are a tablet broken, take your stylus and join the lines anew. The accompanying ritual involved inscribing his symptoms on a clay figurine, then erasing them with a blend of tamarisk resin and honey, a tangible act of celestial editing. This association between writing and wellness echoes into modern medicine. The word prescription itself comes from Latin prescriber, to write before. And just as Babylonian healers invoked Nabu to legitimize their treatments, today's doctors still sign their names atop orders, a faint ripple of the ancient belief that authority over life begins with a mark on a page. The god who once inked destinies into clay would likely nod in recognition at our MRI scans and genetic codes, still striving millennia later to read the body's deepest scripts. The creatures bound to Nabu were never mere mascots, they were living symbols of his dominion over wisdom and the unseen threads of fate. Chief among them coiled the Mus letter 1 E2 Bus S U, a dragon-like hybrid whose very form was a cipher of divine authority. With the sinuous body of a serpent, the forelegs of a lion, and the talons of an eagle, this beast wasn't just Nabu's companion, it was a walking manifesto of his power. Serpents symbolized the god's ability to navigate the hidden currents of knowledge, their undulating forms mirroring the twists of cuneiform wedges. The lion's paws spoke of royal authority, echoing Nabu's role as kingmaker, while the eagle's claws hinted at his reach into celestial realms. When depicted on temple walls, the Mus letter 1 E2 Bus S U often curled protectively around Nabu's stylus, its tail forming a living cartouche framing sacred inscriptions. Yet this dragon had a darker twin in the underworld serpent Bashmu, a creature some texts describe as Nabu's shadow self. Where the Mus letter 1E2 Bus U adorned temple gates, Bashmu dwelled in the Abzu, the primordial waters beneath the earth, guarding the inkwells of the deep, where Nabu supposedly dipped his stylus to rewrite destinies. Ritual texts from Assyria reveal that during eclipses, priests would scatter serpentine-shaped bread loaves as offerings, believing cosmic disturbances occurred when Bashmu stirred without Nabu's command. This duality reflected Mesopotamian cosmology's balance. Even the god of order required chaos as his ink. Less fearsome but equally significant was the turtle, Nabu's unlikely second sacred creature. Cylinder seals show them crawling at his feet, their shells etched with cuneiform signs. Unlike the dragon's grandeur, the turtle embodied patient scholarship, their hard carapaces mirroring clay tablets, their slow movement symbolizing meticulous thought. A school text from Nippur counsels students to be like Nabu's turtle, carry wisdom lightly but never set it down. Some healing amulets took turtle shapes, their undersides inscribed with prayers for longevity, subtly equating the creature's famed lifespan with Nabu's power to extend the tablet of one's days. The most enigmatic of Nabu's zoomorphic symbols wasn't a living creature at all, but a composite, the winged solar disk often hovering above his scenes. Borrowed from Egyptian iconography but thoroughly Babylonianized, this hybrid of falcon wings and sun circle represented Nabu's role as cosmic archivist. The wings evoked the swift spread of written knowledge, while the disk symbolized the unblinking eye under which all deeds were recorded. During the Akitu festival, priests would release doves with sun disk pendants tied to their legs, literal messengers mirroring Nabu's function as divine communicator. What tied these creatures together was their shared liminality, neither fully earthly nor wholly celestial. They straddled realms just as Nabu bridged gods and mortals. Even their materials carried meaning. Temple Mus Hachek letter 1, E2, Bus Hachek S Hachek U statues had lapis lazuli scales for wisdom and gold claws for permanence, while ritual turtle figurines were molded from clay mixed with crushed tablet fragments, a physical echo of knowledge made tangible. To encounter these animals in art or ritual wasn't just to see symbols. It was to witness the living alphabet of Nabu's power, each beast a syllable in an ongoing divine sentence. Among the celestial dance of stars and planets, the Babylonians spotted a familiar pattern, one that bound their god of wisdom to the swift-moving light they called the jumping star. This was Mercury, the elusive planet that darts across the horizon with the same restless energy as Nabu's stylus etching destinies into clay. To the ancient sky watchers, this wasn't coincidence, it was divine synchronicity. They named the planet after Nabu himself, cementing his role not just as an earthbound scribe but as a cosmic force weaving through the heavens. What made Mercury the perfect celestial mirror for Nabu? Its very behavior told the story. Just as Nabu moved between realms, mediating between gods and mortals, life and death, Mercury oscillated between evening and morning skies, never lingering long enough to be pinned down. Babylonian astronomers meticulously recorded these movements, interpreting them as Nabu's celestial dispatches. A tablet from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II notes that when Mercury appeared bright in the month of Nisanu, it signaled Nabu's approval of the king's upcoming campaigns. But if the planet vanished too quickly or dimmed unexpectedly, that was a divine memo scribbled in the stars: revise your plans. The connections ran deeper than mere symbolism. Nabu's temple at Borsippa doubled as an observatory where priests tracked Mercury's path alongside Jupiter and Venus, mapping their movements onto clay tablets with the same precision they used for legal contracts. One remarkable artifact, the astrolabe B, divides the sky into 12 segments, each governed by a deity, with Mercury's sector labeled Nabu's Gate. Here, the planet wasn't just an omen, it was a portal through which the god's wisdom flowed into the world. Ritual texts describe priests timing incantations to Mercury's risings, believing the planet's light amplified Nabu's ability to open the ears of other gods to human pleas. But Nabu's astral influence wasn't limited to Mercury alone. The constellation Orion, known in Babylon as the true shepherd of heaven, was said to be Nabu's nightly patrol, his stars forming a celestial tablet where earthly events were prewritten. When Orion's belt stars aligned vertically at dawn, it signaled the start of the Akitu festival, as if the god himself had flipped a cosmic page. Even the Pleiades cluster carried his mark, called the Seven Scribes, These stars were believed to be Nabu's celestial apprentices, each holding a fragment of the universal ledger. The brilliance of this system lay in its fluidity. Unlike rigid astrological traditions that came later, Babylonian star reading treated celestial signs as living documents, open to interpretation like clay tablets awaiting Nabu's edits. A meteor streaking through Mercury's path might nullify a previously favorable omen, just as a king could amend a law. This mindset birthed history's first known astrological handbook, the Enuma Anu in Lil, where over 7,000 omens link planetary movements to earthly events, all under Nabu's symbolic oversight. What's startling is how these ancient observations still echo today. Modern astronomy confirms Mercury's orbit syncs with Earth's in cycles that roughly match the Babylonian sacred number 60, a coincidence that would have delighted Nabu's priests. And in a twist the god might appreciate, NASA messenger probe, which mapped Mercury's surface in 2011, carried a replica cuneiform tablet honoring Nabu's connection to the planet. The circle closes. The deity who once ruled celestial scribbles now lends his name to humanity's efforts to decode the cosmos, proving that some bonds between gods, stars, and the minds that chase them transcend millennia. Nabu's shadow stretches far beyond the crumbling walls of ancient Mesopotamia. His essence lingers in the DNA of modern storytelling, hidden in plain sight. Consider the wizards of contemporary fantasy, Gandalf's staff, Dumbledore's quill, even Doctor Strange's hovering glyphs, all carry echoes of Nabu's stylus, tools that transform knowledge into power. The archetype of the divine scribe never truly vanished, it evolved. In Neil Gaiman's American Gods, the character Mr. Ibis, a modern incarnation of Thoth, muses over ledgers of the dead, his pen scratching out fates with eerie precision. This isn't just homage, it's cultural memory, a thread connecting Babylonian temples to 21st century pages. Video games have resurrected Nabu's legacy with startling clarity. In the Elder Scrolls, the Daedric prince Hermias Mora hoards forbidden knowledge in a library of writhing tentacles, his realm filled with floating tomes and ink-black pools, a Lovecraftian twist on Nabu's tablet-filled Ezida. Similarly, Assassin's Creed Origins features an entire questline where players recover lost scrolls for the Library of Alexandria, mirroring the Babylonian reverence for sacred texts. These digital worlds unconsciously replicate Nabu's core truth. Control over information is control over reality itself. Even superhero mythology bends to his influence. DC Comics' Dr. Fate wields the Helmet of Nabu, an artifact that grants wisdom at the price of autonomy, a trade-off the Babylonians would recognize instantly. Ancient hymns describe Nabu's priests as vessels for the god's voice during rituals, their hands moving, as if strings pulled by heaven. The parallel is unmistakable. Both narratives explore the peril and promise of channeling divine knowledge, asking whether enlightenment demands surrender. Perhaps the most poignant modern echo lies in our relationship with technology. Social media algorithms, AI language models, even blockchain ledgers, all are digital descendants of Nabu's tablet of destinies, systems that record, dictate, and sometimes distort human fate. We no longer whisper prayers to statues, but we still cling to the belief that data can divine the future, whether through predictive analytics or viral horoscopes. The god who once hardened clay tablets would nod in recognition at our glowing screens, where every keystroke is a new wedge pressed into the endless scroll of collective memory. What Nabu's enduring presence reveals is deeper than pop culture references. It's proof that certain archetypes are wired into human consciousness: the scribe, the seer, the keeper of hidden keys. His legacy survives not because we remember his name, but because we still live by his rules. That writing is sorcery, that archives are temples, and that whoever holds the stylus, whether of reed or silicon, holds the power to reshape worlds. Among the dust of millennia, archaeologists have unearthed silent witnesses to Nabu's once thriving cult objects that bridge the gap between myth and tangible history. One of the most striking finds emerged from the ruins of his temple at Borsippa, a life-sized statue of the god seated on a throne, his lap cradling a tablet inscribed with cuneiform. The stylus in his right hand isn't merely decorative, it's detachable, designed for ritual use, as if priests might momentarily animate the divine scribe by pressing it into wet clay. Traces of gold leaf still cling to his robe, hinting at the opulence described in hymns that praised his garments woven with starlight, but the real treasure lay beneath the statue's base. Excavators discovered a foundation deposit, a time capsule of sorts containing miniature replicas of writing tools, tiny bronze style, clay tablets no larger than fingernails, and a lapis lazuli cylinder seal carved with Nabu's dragon emblem. These weren't mere offerings, they were metaphysical batteries charging the temple's very walls with the god's presence. Nearby, a cracked pedestal bore the footprint of a second statue, likely Nabu's consort Tashmetu, her absence echoing the violence of the temple's final sacking. Further north in Nimrud, the discovery of the Nabu suite within the northwest palace revealed a different dimension of his worship. Here, amidst murals of winged gennies, excavators uncovered a trove of administrative tablets, over 300 perfectly preserved records detailing temple operations. One lists the daily rations for the scribes who eat Nabu's bread, including precise measurements of beer and dates. Another, more haunting, documents the loan of a statue during a political crisis, pledging the god himself as collateral. These dry, bureaucratic notes humanize the sacred, showing Nabu not just as a celestial figure, but as the anchor of a vast, earthly institution. The most intimate glimpse comes from smaller finds, objects that slip through history's cracks. In a Babylonian merchant's house at archaeologists found a clay envelope sealed with Nabu's cylinder seal. Inside, a child's practice tablet bore the shaky but determined strokes of a first writing lesson, its margins scratched with a plea, "Nabu, make my hand swift." Even more poignant is a hematite amulet from Sippar, shaped like a stylus and inscribed with a healing prayer, worn smooth by centuries of anxious fingers. These artifacts whisper of a god who permeated daily life, his influence as personal as it was imperial. Among the most controversial discoveries is the Nabu Codex, a 7th century BC clay book from Nineveh that rewrote earlier myths to position Nabu as co-creator alongside Marduk. Its fragmented lines describe Nabu numbering the days of the universe and binding the cords of celestial spheres, claims that likely reflected Assyrian attempts to elevate his status during their rule over Babylon. The Codex wasn't just theology, it was soft power, using Nabu's prestige to legitimize foreign domination. Perhaps no artifact captures Nabu's paradox better than the treasury of words uncovered at Kalhu, a vault containing thousands of tablet fragments deliberately broken during the city's fall. Pieced together, they reveal something astonishing: meticulous copies of every known Mesopotamian text, from epic poetry to laundry lists, each bearing a colophon dedicating it to Nabu. This wasn't mere storage, it was a fail-safe, an attempt to preserve civilization itself by entrusting its memory to the god who first taught humanity to write. The broken edges of those tablets mirror the fragility of the knowledge they sought to protect, and the enduring power of the deity who promised, against all odds, to make words outlast empires. The origins of Nabu have sparked fierce debate among scholars, revealing how even the gods themselves are subject to reinterpretation. Some researchers argue that Nabu began as an epithet of Marduk, a specialized aspect of the supreme god responsible for record-keeping, before gradually developing into a distinct deity. This theory finds support in early texts from the Old Babylonian period, where the name Nabu occasionally appears alongside Marduk's like a title rather than a separate being. A particularly telling example comes from a broken hymn found at Sippar, which addresses Marduk as he who is called Nabu when the tablet is pressed, suggesting a dual identity that shifted with context. Yet other experts point to the Sumerian goddess Nisaba as Nabu's true precursor, noting how her domains of grain and writing neatly split into two male deities, Nabu for scribble arts and a separate grain god, as Mesopotamian culture became increasingly patriarchal. Cuneiform tablets from the Roman III period show Nisaba holding a stylus nearly identical to Nabu's later iconography, while offering lists from Nippur reveal her temple once employed the same class of scholar-priests later associated with Nabu's cult. The transition appears deliberate. When the Babylonians rose to power, they may have refashioned this respected but feminine deity into a male heir worthy of Marduk's court. The debate grows more complex when examining regional variations. In Assyria, Nabu sometimes eclipsed Marduk entirely, a theological shift that mirrored political tensions between the rival empires. Assyrian kings like Sargon II commissioned inscriptions calling Nabu the determiner of fates without whom Marduk cannot decree, effectively demoting the traditional head of the pantheon. This wasn't mere preference, it was ideological warfare waged through mythology. The discovery of a mutilated statue in Kalhu, where Nabu's face was carefully defaced while Marduk's remained intact, suggests violent backlash against this heresy during Babylon's brief resurgence. Modern excavations have added fuel to these disputes. The 1980s discovery of the Temple of the Dual Gods at Jor-Kurigaltsu revealed twin altars, one inscribed for Marduk, another for Nabu, with artifacts suggesting they shared equal status in this Kassite-era complex. Even more provocative are the Mari letters, where a correspondent complains about the two scribe gods, causing confusion in temple rituals, implying some communities worshipped Nabu alongside Nisaba long after her supposed replacement. These finds challenge the linear evolution theory, presenting instead a messy reality where multiple versions of the deity coexisted. The controversies extend to Nabu's cosmic role. Traditional readings of the Enuma Elish position him as Marduk's obedient scribe, but newly translated fragments from Ugarit describe Nabu rewriting portions of the creation epic to amplify his own role, an ancient case of divine resume padding. Meanwhile, Assyrian astrological texts frequently substitute Nabu for Marduk in celestial prophecies, leading some to suggest the separate deity camp may be projecting later political divisions onto earlier unified theology. What emerges from these clashes of interpretation is a portrait of divine identity as fluid as the Euphrates. Nabu may have begun as a function, became a figurehead, and evolved into a flashpoint for cultural conflict, but his enduring power lies precisely in this adaptability. Whether as aspect, heir, or rival, his story mirrors humanity's own struggle to reconcile tradition with change, unity with individuality, and the weight of the past with the press of the stylus into fresh clay. The ancient hymns to Nabu are more than poetry. They are whispered conversations with divinity, pressed into clay with the same care as legal contracts or royal decrees. One of the most revealing, the exaltation of Nabu, opens with a line that captures his dual nature. "O Nabu, your stylus is a lightning bolt, your tablet the storm cloud." Here, writing isn't passive, it's as volatile as the elements, capable of both creation and destruction. The hymn continues with a plea, "Carve my name into the cedar of heaven, that it may not rot like reed in the marsh." This metaphor, contrasting fragile reeds with enduring cedar, mirrors Babylon's obsession with permanence. To be forgotten was to die twice, and Nabu's hymns often served as insurance against oblivion. Another striking example, the night prayer of a scribe discovered on a tablet in Uruk, reveals raw vulnerability. "Nabu, my hand trembles like a drunkard's at the tavern door. Steady it as you steady the stars, lest my errors anger the gods." The intimacy is startling, Unlike grandiose royal inscriptions, this is a private moment of doubt where the scribe admits fear beneath his sacred duty. The prayer concludes with a poignant bargain. "I will anoint your statue with honey from Dilmun if you anoint my tablet with clarity." Honey, the sweetest offering, becomes currency for divine inspiration, a trade as pragmatic as it is spiritual. Royal hymns strike a different tone. The coronation liturgy of Nebuchadnezzar Roman II boasts, "Nabu has written my reign in lapis lazuli, not clay, who can erase the blue stone of heaven." The choice of lapis, a stone imported from Afghanistan, elevates the king's rule beyond earthly challenge. Yet even here, power depends on Nabu's endorsement. One verse admits, "Without his stylus, my scepter is a broken reed," acknowledging that martial strength means nothing if the celestial scribe withdraws his ink. The most haunting pleas come from the laments of the forgotten, fragmentary tablets found in village ruins. A farmer writes, "Nabu, if my fields must lie fallow, at least write my grief where the gods will see it." Another, a grieving mother, "You who tally the years of men, add my son's name to your ledger of the honored dead." These aren't requests for intervention but for witness, a desperate hope that suffering recorded is suffering sanctified. What unites these hymns is their transactional honesty. Unlike the distant reverence offered to gods like Enlil, Nabu's devotees speak to him as a divine colleague. A scribbled training text from Nippur advises, "When you pray to Nabu, list your qualifications like a job application." One apprentice's tablet begins, "I have memorized 1,200 signs." Is that not worthy of your favor? This wasn't arrogance but intimacy, the understanding that Nabu, as patron of scribes, valued effort as much as flattery. The hymns also expose Nabu's evolving role. Early Sumerian-influenced prayers address him as Nabu of the storehouse, linking him to Nisaba's agricultural roots. But by the Neo-Babylonian period, he's Nabu of the cosmos, his stylus now engraving the orbits of planets. This shift mirrors Babylon's transformation from city-state to empire, its god growing as expansive as its ambitions. Yet the most profound insight lies in the hymn's physical form. Many were written on letter tablets, clay rectangles folded like envelopes, sealed with Nabu's cylinder seal. To open one was to violate sacred space. A broken example from ashore reveals tiny fingerprints pressed into the clay, likely the supplicant's own. The act of writing became tactile worship, fingers tracing prayers as if touching the god's hand. These silent details remind us that devotion for the Babylonians wasn't abstract. It was clay, honey, trembling hands, and the unshakable faith that words, once written, could bridge the gap between dust and divinity. Nabu's legacy wasn't just about preserving words, it was about the weight they carried. In a civilization where every stroke of the stylus could decree a king's legitimacy or a merchant's honesty, writing was inseparable from morality. The god's most enduring ethical teaching, that knowledge without integrity is as fragile as an unfired clay tablet left in the rain. A hymn from Sippar puts it bluntly, "Nabu's stylus carves truth, but the liar's hand snaps it." This wasn't abstract virtue, it was practical theology. Contracts from this era often included a curse invoking Nabu's wrath against forgers, not just legal penalties, but cosmic consequences. One particularly vivid example from Nippur warns that a fraudulent scribe would find his own name erased from the tablet of life, a poetic justice that mirrored the act of deceit itself. Justice in Nabu's domain was deeply procedural. The famed Dialogue of Pessimism, a philosophical text preserved in Ashurbanipal's library, features a student debating whether to pursue wisdom or wealth. Nabu's implied answer, woven through the metaphors, is striking. The unrecorded truth is no truth at all. This wasn't mere pedantry, it reflected a society where oral oaths could be disputed, but written testimony was immutable. Even Hammurabi's code, though credited to Shamash the sun god, bears Nabu's fingerprints in its insistence that laws be publicly inscribed, that the strong may not oppress the weak. The underlying principle, transparency, is the bedrock of equity. Yet Nabu's ethics also acknowledge the limits of rigid legality. A remarkable prayer tablet from a Babylonian judge pleads, "Nabu, give me the wisdom to see the unwritten law behind the wedges." Here, the god isn't just a celestial notary but a mentor urging discernment. This tension between letter and spirit surfaces in trial records where judges reference Nabu's mercy, allowing debt relief despite strict contractual terms. The lesson resonates across millennia. Rules exist to serve humanity, not the other way around. The god's teachings extended to intellectual humility. Scribble schools drilled students in a maxim: to write is to stand on the shoulders of giants. Each copied text began with acknowledgments of prior scholars, a practice echoing modern academic citations. Errors weren't erased but annotated. One medical tablet from Uruk preserves a mistaken dosage with a marginal note. "As Nabu showed me afterward, this is wrong." In an age without backspace keys, accountability was baked into the very medium. Perhaps the most profound ethical thread is Nabu's insistence that knowledge obligates action. The Counsels of Wisdom, a text pinned to temple walls, admonishes, "He who reads the stars but ignores suffering is no priest of Nabu." This call to applied wisdom manifests in records where scribes doubled as advocates, translating laws for illiterate farmers or drafting petitions for widows. A letter from Mary captures this ethos perfectly. A scribe interrupts a royal chronicle to document a famine, writing, "Nabu would not let me turn the page while children hunger." These teachings weren't confined to elites. Proverbs etched on cheap clay tablets circulated widely. "Better a truthful pauper than a lying prince," or "The stingy scholar starves Nabu's dragon." Even humor carried moral weight. A satirical poem mocks a corrupt official whose ledger weighs more in lies than silver. The punchline, "Nabu's divine scales measure ink, not metal." What emerges is an ethical system astonishingly modern in its concerns. Data integrity, social responsibility, the ethics of record-keeping, yet deeply rooted in its time. Nabu's stylus didn't just write laws, it modeled how to live with them. In a world where misinformation can topple regimes and algorithms dictate fates, this ancient god's insistence on truth as a sacred craft feels less like history and more like a warning etched in clay, waiting to be rediscovered. From the moment his stylus first touched clay, Nabu's influence stretched far beyond the temples of Babylon. He became the quiet architect of civilization itself. Think about what it meant to worship a god who didn't wield thunder or command armies, but held something far more transformative: the power to turn thought into permanence. In a world where empires rose and fell like floodwaters, Nabu's domain, writing, wisdom, and the meticulous order of the cosmos was the bedrock that outlasted kings. His legacy isn't just carved into ancient tablets, it's woven into the very fabric of how humanity remembers, governs, and seeks meaning. Consider the paradox of his role. While gods like Marduk embodied raw power and Ishtar personified passion, Nabu's authority flowed from something subtler yet more enduring: the silent act of inscription. A treaty signed under his gaze bound nations more securely than any oath sworn on a battlefield. A student's practice tablet, scratched with his name, carried the weight of divine apprenticeship. Even the stars obeyed his ledger, their movements recorded as precisely as tax receipts. This wasn't mysticism, it was the birth of bureaucracy as sacred craft, where every written word became a thread in the tapestry of order. Yet Nabu's true genius lay in his accessibility. Unlike distant sky gods, he lived in the hands of scribes hunched over clay, in the muttered prayers of merchants sealing deals, in the hopeful tears of parents begging him to inscribe their child's name among the living. His temples doubled as libraries and schools, throwing open the gates of knowledge to those willing to learn. The Babylonians understood something profound. That writing wasn't just for elites. It was the great democratizer, a tool that could elevate a farmer's contract to the same sacred status as a king's decree. Today, though his name echoes faintly outside history books, Nabu's essence lingers wherever words shape destiny. Every time we hit save on a document, every algorithm that predicts our choices, even the quiet awe we feel holding a centuries-old book, these are unconscious nods to the God who first taught us that memory could defy time. The next time you jot down a note or lose yourself in a story, remember, you're participating in a ritual as old as civilization itself, one that began with a Babylonian deity and his unassuming stylus. So what do you think? Does Nabu's story resonate with you? How do you see the threads of ancient mythology weaving into our modern world? Drop your thoughts below, because if there's one thing Nabu taught us, it's that every voice deserves to be recorded.